You are listening to SRM Insider. This is the Cyber Intelligence Briefing, your weekly roundup of the latest cybersecurity news and insights, straight from SRM's leading global incident response team. Welcome to another episode of SRM's Cyber Intelligence Briefing. I'm Kyle Schwebler, and I'm joined by my colleagues Miles Arkwright and James Teitler.
Hello.
Hi, bro. This week, we'll discuss how the ransomware group BlackCat has filed an SEC complaint against MeridianLink for failing to disclose a data breach. CISA and the FBI have published a joint advisory warning against the ransomware group Scattered Spider, while the UK's NCSC also confirmed a record high in reported cyber attacks. The Citrix Bleed vulnerability, which we mentioned last week, has claimed two more high-profile victims in the DP World and Toyota. Microsoft and Fortinet have released patches for critical vulnerabilities. We'll learn how the Royal Mail and Rackspace breaches cost each organization millions, and the CISO of Clorox has stepped down. And then finally, we'll be hearing from SRM's UK Head of Cyber, Jamie Smith, who will be speaking about some findings from SRM's annual Cyber Insights report that was published last week. Let's kick off with the news that ransomware gang BlackCat has reported the software company MeridianLink to the US Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, for failing to disclose a significant cyber incident within 4 business days, as per the new rules for listed firms. BlackCat claims it breached the software company on the 7th of November, but it seems like they may have slightly jumped the gun, as the new rules don't come into effect until next month.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting development because it just really highlights how threat actors are always looking for new extortion techniques. However, I think it remains to be seen how the SEC will actually react to malicious complaints like these filed by ransomware gangs once the rules do come into force next month. I mean, this is a particularly aggressive tactic, but it also assumes a degree of dishonesty on the part of the victims and presuming that they actually wouldn't want to make any disclosure, which I think is also problematic.
Yeah, thanks, James. And in other news, the FBI and CISA have released a threat advisory on the Scattered Spider ransomware group. The advisory details how the group uses social engineering techniques for initial access, data exfiltration, and file encryption with BlackCat ransomware. The advisory comes after the group have targeted large organizations such as MGM Resorts and Caesars Entertainment. The FBI have also come under fire for their handling of this ransomware group, which has likely contributed towards the advisory's release.
Yeah, that's right, Miles. And the advisory piece does also include some crucial risk mitigation measures, which can be applied. So definitely do have a read of that if you're a security professional. I want to move on briefly. As both of you guys will know, last week SRM published its annual Cyber Insights report. And this reflects the cybersecurity experiences of 600 C-suite executives and IT professionals over the past year. There's some really interesting findings and analysis in the report, which is broken down into 3 key discussion points. It's cybersecurity budgets. Secondly, how industry sectors might influence cyber incidents. And then lastly, a view of the most prominent cybersecurity challenges. I've invited Jamie Smith, the global head of cybersecurity at SRM, onto the podcast to discuss some of the findings around the cybersecurity budgets in this year's report. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, Kyle.
Jamie, I read through the Insights report and was surprised to see that cyber budgets had barely increased this year. I thought that with the increasing cyber threat landscape and just the general awareness of cybersecurity, that we would see a bigger increase this year. I'm also pretty sure I saw predictions last year that budgets would be increasing by about 8% in 2023. Why do you think they've only increased by 3%?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. We did expect a higher increase in budgets this year based on the findings of last year, and that hasn't materialized. I think the main issue really is the current economic environment, which has meant that cyber budgets, amongst other budgets, have been cut. I think what we're also seeing, though, is a realization that it's not just about the size of budget, it's about how budgets are spent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, obviously, organizations are having to eke out more value from less investment. Can you share any insights into how organizations are actually enhancing their cybersecurity without necessarily spending any more money?
Yeah. So we are seeing organizations kind of taking three broad approaches to managing cyber risk when budgets are tight. First of all, in terms of IT and security optimization, what we're seeing is companies have lots of different providers doing lots of different tasks. And we are seeing a move towards consolidating these providers in order to make it more cost effective. So, for example, undertaking a technology benefit exercise to determine whether multiple solutions for risk reduction is preferential to moving everything to one major cloud provider. Second is we are seeing companies investing for the future. So investing for security initiatives which are going to create longer term cost savings. The big one here really is around AI and automation. And we're already seeing the adoption of AI create lots of value here in terms of automating processes and reducing cost. And the third is outsourcing, so contracting out IT and security functions to either managed service security providers or virtual CISOs, for example. And what this can provide a company is best-in-class support and advice without the requirement to maintain expensive internal overheads.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that only 49% of organizations believe that cybersecurity technologies deliver high value for money. I know it's still sort of the highest category, but I would have expected that number to be higher.
Yes, that is true. And actually, if you go back 2 years ago, we actually saw close to 60% of respondents cite investing in technology as where they get the highest value for money. And so what we've seen over the last 3 years is this come down to just under 50% now. And I think this is probably a kind of a reflection of the realization that buying tech isn't like waving a magic wand. And there's lots of other processes that are required, lots of investments required to go around this technology in order to make it effective.
One interesting finding from the report was the different attitudes between IT or cyber budget holders and the C-suite executives at organizations when it comes to the value for money of both cybersecurity technology and also cyber insurance. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So this was an interesting finding, and there was a big difference in the answers given by IT professionals and those at the C-suite for both investment in technology and the value that that created and cyber insurance. So if we start with investment in technology, actually only 43% of IT professionals cited technology as a high value for money investment area, compared to 56% of C-suite business leaders. And I think this difference really reflects a kind of misalignment between the expectations of these two different groups. One, the C-suite, who are perhaps further away from the actual technologies themselves, kind of see it as you buy a technology and it solves everything, whereby those at the coal face of the business and using these applications day to day realize that actually there's lots of other things that are required and that are necessary really to make technology work. In terms of insurance, we did again see very different attitudes towards this. C-suite leaders saw much greater value than IT professionals in having a cybersecurity insurance policy in place. So it was 48% of C-suite respondents as opposed to 36% of IT professionals cited it as something of high value. And I think this is probably because C-suites see the effects of a cyber attack in its entirety, really in kind of the impact of business interruption, regulatory and reputational implications of a cyber incident, beyond just the immediate effects of the IT estate.
Thanks, Jamie. That was extremely interesting. Thanks so much for coming on to speak with me.
It is my pleasure, Kyle. And for anyone listening, on the 7th of December, we are hosting a webinar to go through all the findings of this report and discuss them in more detail. So please do watch out for that.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you, Jamie. And next week, we'll be discussing in more detail the report's findings around how industry sectors might influence cyber incidents. Moving on, though, the Citrix Bleed vulnerability, which we discussed in last week's episode, continues to be exploited by ransomware groups. So the Australian port operator DP World and also Toyota Financial Services, both of which had suffered major attacks, were found to have been vulnerable to the Citrix Bleed vulnerability at the time of the incidents. So while neither victim has formally confirmed that Citrix Bleed was the root cause, this really highlights the importance of timely patch implementation. We know that large organizations often struggle with this due to internal policies around changes, and often IT teams might need sign-off from dozens of people before any major changes can even be made. But threat actors will show no such hesitation and quickly move to exploit any unpatched infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that is really concerning about this vulnerability specifically is that it allows threat actors to steal active sessions. So they can essentially come back to a breached environment at a later date if these sessions are not revoked. So it sort of highlights why just patching vulnerable systems is not enough. Organizations must actually go and revoke all sessions to make sure that a threat actor can't maintain persistent access even after patching.
Yeah, that's right, Carl. And we've also put out some more detailed remediation advice on our website. And speaking of patching, which organizations should be looking out for, Microsoft has addressed 58 bugs and 5 zero-day vulnerabilities in this month's Patch Tuesday. 3 of these vulnerabilities are being actively exploited in the wild. And also, we've seen that Fortinet have just released security updates to fix a critical command injection flaw in FortiSeam.
Thanks, Miles. In other news, Royal Mail and Rackspace, you may recall, they recently had some significant cyber incidents. They both separately revealed that they have each incurred over £10 million in incident costs following their attacks earlier this year. These costs were attributed mostly to remediation efforts and other ongoing expenses.
Yes, and last week we also saw the departure of Amy Bojack, the CISO of Clorox. So she's resigned following a major cyber attack on the company this summer that led to significant business disruption, which reportedly cost over $500 million in lost revenue. The news has also seen the company's market cap drop by a mammoth $3 billion. So it's really hard not to draw a link between her departure and the recent incident. I think this goes to show that there's often a personal as well as financial cost after a major cyber attack.
Yeah, one of the things I think that story also shows is the importance of simulated tabletop exercises. These exercises can really help organizations minimize disruptions by testing and refining response plans, identifying weaknesses in processes, and ensuring that key stakeholders, whether that's senior executives or a technical resource, are aware and trained on what will be expected of them should that worst case scenario occur.
Yeah, absolutely. The importance of those tabletop exercises and just being well prepared for incidents should not be overlooked. Aside from this, we've also seen that the UK's National Cyber Security Centre, or NCSC, has released its annual report for 2023. The report shows that the agency has received a record of 2,005 voluntary reports of cyber attacks this year, which is a 64% increase on the previous year. Many of these incidents were tied to application vulnerabilities. So I know that the NCSC has been making major efforts to encourage victims to come forward and report cybercrime. So it's difficult to say if this directly correlates with an actual increase in attacks or whether it indicates that the NCSC has had more success in this regard of late. Nevertheless, it's always interesting to see these sorts of trends.
Thanks, guys. That brings us to an end of this week's episode.
Great. Thanks, Carl. Goodbye.
Until next week. Goodbye.